Coaching in Session.
Your exclusive destination for unparalleled personal and professional growth.
With your host, Michael Rearden.
Whether you choose to live within limits or break free, your mindset journey begins here.
Welcome, Mitchell Osmond, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
Doing well, my friend. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks so much for coming on. Today, we're going to be talking about your work peak performance coaching and how you help entrepreneurs get to the next level. And I know in our world of business, in our world of technology, everyone's vying for the top, and you are going to be helping people set themselves apart, to, I guess you could say, set the bar, the parameter for what people should be vying for. But if you could, can you tell us who you are, what you do, and of course, how you help people?
Yeah, man, for sure. So a little bit about me is as you mentioned, I help high performing men reclaim their home and their health and their happiness. So a lot of my story comes from my own personal experience, man. So a little bit about me is I grew up in a dysfunctional home. I had a non-existent real relationship with my father. He was an alcoholic for most of my life. I grew up in a home that was riddled with crime, abuse, drugs, all those different things. And I thought I had that kind of dealt with for most of my life. But then when I got married, all that sort of inner pain, that unprocessed pain began to spill out into my marriage. And then after 3 years of being married, we just hit a brick wall, and where for the first time in my life, we had a fight. And not for the first time in my life, we had a fight. We had a fight, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I couldn't fix it. It was one of those, this might be the end moments. So that was the first turning point. And then about a week later, I went to a funeral that I was actually asked to sing at this funeral. And it was of this philanthropic man. He was very successful. And, the minister in the room, as he was wrapping up the funeral, had asked the question to the congregation, are you living a life worthy of imitation? And and he just said, like, are you leaving a legacy that you would be proud of one day? And as I was strapping on my guitar, getting ready to sing the last song, I could barely choke out the lyrics, Michael, because all I could think was, man, if this was my funeral, people wouldn't be saying, man, I wish I had a marriage like him, or he taught me how to be in better shape, or he taught me how to get control of my life, or they probably would have said he struggled and then it was over. Because what had happened, you see, Michael, was I was always in positions of leadership, and that always made sense to me. But at that 3-year mark when we had that fight, I was let go of a senior leadership position that I was in, and I spiraled into depression. I gained about 60 pounds. We were about 100 grand in debt. Our marriage was just hanging on by a thread. And I was medicating with alcohol, with drugs to just compensate, to cope, really, to get through every day. And that was kind of where I was at. And so, as we finished up that funeral, I left that church and I thought, man, I need to take ownership of my life. I need to take ownership of everything where I've come from. I need to heal from the pain, and I need to repair my marriage and become the man that, lives a life that's worthy of imitation. And so, I went home, and then the next day, I started that journey. And then I surrounded myself with a community of men who were, my ceiling was their floor. Men who could show me how to be the man that I wanted to be in whether it was my finances, my fitness, my marriage, my faith, all those different things. Honestly, within a year and a half, within 18 months, completely restored our marriage, lost the 60 pounds, got lean, strong, paid off the 100 grand in debt, and then and most importantly, was clean, sober, and free of any anxiety and frustration. And then, Michael, I just kind of started helping out my friends around me at that time. Because I was in public positions, everyone was like, what is going on, man? How did you do that? How did you lose the weight? How did you turn your life around? And then 3 or 4 years after that, somebody challenged me and they said, dude, if you really want to have impact, you should start a podcast and share your story with the rest of the world. And so I started the Dad Nation podcast. And then I began to just basically teach the principles that I applied to my own life and all the things that I've learned along the way. I'm a voracious reader. And I was always, like I said, I was always passionate about mentorship. And then within 6 or 7 months, I had listeners around North America. And then people would reach out to me and just say, hey, could you help me? Can I hire you? Do you have any courses you could sell me? And so I launched my coaching practice. And within 6 months, was able to scale that to a six-figure practice and really just doing the same thing that I applied the same principles that I applied to my own life to see transformation. I was listening to a podcast with Ed Milet a little while ago, and he said, "You're the most qualified to help the person you used to be." And Michael, that's really what I did, and that's what got me here. And I'm just passionate about helping men restore their relationships with their partners to become powerful, like present fathers, to help them show up in a new way, and to help them reclaim their home, their health, and their happiness, to eliminate self sabotaging practices or the imposter syndrome, all those different things, right? So that's a little bit about where I came from and what kind of got me into it.
Thank you for sharing your story and then everything. There's so much, and I'm going to do my best to unpack everything. So, one of the things that I will love to talk about is the inception of that wake up, where it's like I have to take ownership. Some people, they wait for that moment where it's like everything is broken, like like the world's on fire. But was there something like an inkling before that you might have said, it would have been better if I took action then rather than wait until everything was broken?
Yeah, absolutely, man. There were so many signs. There were so many signs that I wish I would have picked up on along the way. I would have reached out a lot earlier, but I think the problem is we're so inundated with the urgent, that we don't take care of the important, right? And just because it's urgent doesn't mean it's important, or just because it's urgent, yeah, it doesn't mean that you need to pay attention to it right now. So it kind of goes back to the Eisenhower matrix. I don't know if you're aware of that, but essentially there are things that are important and there are things that are urgent and there are things that are urgently important, but not everything is the same, right? So someone might say to you, this thing is urgent, but it may not be important that you do it right away. Or there could be something like, for example, a date night to plan with your spouse or whatever. That's important, but it's not necessarily urgent. But what happens, especially people in positions of leadership or entrepreneurs or whatever you name it, career driven men, everything feels urgent, right? And so you become a slave to the urgent and you forget actually what's really important. So in the process, right? And so you go through life instead of being proactive, you become reactive. And then you're constantly reacting to urgency after urgency after urgency, while in the meantime, your marriage is dying and you're losing relationship with your kids. You're so overwhelmed by the profits in the next quarter or this proposal that needs to be done. My piece of advice to men is to really get honest and real about what matters the most for you. And one real practical tool that I walk through with my clients is just a eulogy exercise. Okay. And I really, at the end of the day, I fabricate the situation that I was in. I get men to essentially write two versions of the eulogy. One version is get them to write what their wife would say from their perspective about the man that they are, the husband, the father they are, right? If they were to pass away today, what would they say about who I was, about the life that I lived? And then the second version is what would I want them to say about the man I was, the father I was? Because Michael, the truth is so much of where our anxiety and our frustration is between where we are currently and where we want to be. Especially as men, we're like, we know where we are and we know how we're showing up. We know all those different things, but we also know, the 2.0 version, the person we want to be. And in that gap, that's where we get frustrated, right? And so Stephen Covey in his book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, chapter 2 is called Begin with the End in Mind. Napoleon Hill talked about this, begin with the end in mind. And so the best thing we can do to inform us on how to live in the present is to observe our future and we want it to look like. So we begin with the end in mind. What do we want to be known for? Right? What do we want? What do we want people to say about the life we lived? Are we at the end of our life? Will we be able to say we lived a life worthy of imitation? And so if we don't know the answer to that, we got to get clear on what that looks like. Be able to answer that question. This is what I want my life to be about. This is, in my definition, this is what it looks like to live a successful life, and reverse engineer those steps into daily action steps to become that man.
One of the things I wanted to inquire about now, because I'm sure most men are thinking about their goals today and they're thinking about ways to get to their goals. And one of the quickest things that can fix most mindsets is if I had more money,
Mm,
then everything will be better. Right. So they give themselves this idea of high performance now, right? Where they're trying to reach the peak of their career. They will maybe forego their family or their marriage for a little bit because they think, once they get to this position of power or of being financially free, stable, that things will magically align. And so, one of the questions I want to ask is, could a man reach that high level of performance and then make his way through all the good parts of his life that he's thinking will happen magically? Or does he have to be able to work with and have some harmony with health, home, and happiness?
Mm. What you're asking is, can you have your cake and eat it too?
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah, I struggle with the word balance because I think there's seasons for everything. I don't know that life is always balanced. And so in every season you're going to pay a price, right? Something's going to take a hit. And and that's fine. You just need to understand what gets it, what takes the hit, what gets put on the back burner versus what goes, oh sorry, I just got to adjust my camera there. What goes on the front burner. You know what I mean? And so for me, I ask the question like, in this next season, what needs to be most important? Because the reality is, and the irony of all this is, so many high performers, that's what they think. Like, well, I'm just going to put my head down. I'm going to grind, and when I bring my head up and I get the money and I got the house and I got the car, then I'm going to like focus on the family, right? But the great irony of all this is, oftentimes men, by the time they get to that point, they've actually lost the family that they worked so hard to provide for, right? And so I've asked clients to myself, I'm like, what's the point in making all this money if at the end of the year you're going to be sitting around the Christmas tree alone? Is it worth it? So the question becomes, at what cost? What price am I willing to pay? Because for everything that gets your yes, every person, place, or thing that you give your yes, some other person, place, or thing gets a no, right? You can't increase your time and exponentiate your time. You only get to make one decision. Whatever gets your yes, something else gets a no. And so in every season, when you take that extra proposal on, or you, that whatever, that commitment, then who's who or what's getting the no. It's really important to understand that, because if you don't keep an eye on that, that's when things get out of balance in a sense, right? And so it's important to have that conversation with your spouse or with your family. Be like, okay, what can I afford to say yes to, and what can I afford to say no to, right? Or what do I need to say no to? And a question I often ask guys is, because we do a lot of good things. Building a business is a good thing. Generating more income is a good thing. Taking vacations is a good thing. These are all good things. But we have probably have too many good things. And so the question becomes, what good things in your life do you have to eliminate to make room for the best things, right? What's the thing that gets my automatic yes because something else is getting a no, right? And so it's really important to keep that in mind and have that conversation going throughout the whole journey. So I would say very, very few people can do that well and put their head down and ignore everything and then get all the accolades, all the income, all that stuff, and then come up for air and hope their family's still there. It's tough to do that and do it well. And so my I guess my counter to that would be like, let's let's have that conversation, and in every season ask ourselves, what cost are we paying right now? Maybe it might be an extra evening out or working or whatever, and we might need to cut some things down or whatever, but understand that at some point I've got to make that back. So does that make sense? I sort of like look at it that way.
I like how you put it, where I know everyone's still probably thinking, I want to do everything, like I want everything on my plate, right? Like I can handle it. But we all have 24 hours in a day. And I think of young children. I have young children. Do you have children yourself? And I think of when they're real young and they're daddy, pick me up. And, they want to always be around you and follow you and hold on to you. And it can get overwhelming, especially like when you're busy and you have to go somewhere. And so one of the things I have to be cognizant about is the same thing I'm cognizant about with my grandparents and my parents, is that as much as I would like to have longer strides, I'm very intentional about, let me match them. And so my kid, or one of them, he can't walk as fast as me. So I have to kind of slow down. But during that time, I'm not saying, life is so rough right now. I have to slow down because of my kid. I look at it as a moment for me to reflect on the little things, the family aspect, right? But then again, there's so many people who are so busy where they can't let their phone go, whether it be the emails or the calls. I have rules with my phone, but people feel as if they're obligated to technology. They're obligated to their emails or their clients or whatever. And so the juggling aspect of obligation to the family or to the, clients or clientele, your work. I know you were saying a yes and a no for one thing, and that maybe there will be seasons in life where maybe you have to say no to your family or no to work. But I'm sure, saying no to your family would have more drastic effects long term than it would be to have a client be upset with you for a week or a month or whatever it be. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I agree 100%. Um, because here's the thing, you get what you tolerate, right? So if you tolerate clients texting you, calling you, emailing you all hours of the day, and you're picking up the phone all the time, then they're gonna keep doing it. Just in the same way as if you tolerate your kids talking back to you and yelling and throwing tantrums, then they're gonna keep doing it, right? And so at the end of the day, you're in control of what your life looks like. And so if you set up healthy boundaries, say for example, you're having a conversation with an employee or a colleague or whatever, and you say, I'm sorry, I can't take that call tonight at 7 p.m. because I'm really trying to focus on my family and I want to put my boy down and have some quality time with him. I mean, who in the right mind is going to be like, that's not important. You need to take the call. Nobody, right?
Yeah.
In fact, they would probably respect you even more as a leader if you actually said that. And they might even be inspired to do the same. And so what we do is we don't have those conversations. We don't set up those boundaries because we don't want to feel like we're weak or we're not hardworking or whatever. But who's making those rules? You, right? You're putting that on yourself. And in fact, if you had the courage to have the conversation with the person, 9 times out of 10, they're going to respect you even more for it. And so, yeah, for me, I would say 100% know who gets your automatic yes. And for me, in my house, my family's going to get my automatic yes. And that's just the rule, you know? And so that's just, I need to be a person of principle and my family needs to know that they're first in priority. And if my actions don't align with my words, then that doesn't really mean a lot.
You brought up a great thing about boundaries. And so basically, I'm going to give you an or question. And basically, it's either or, but you can also make your own thing. So the question is invalid if you want it to be. Are boundaries limits or are boundaries expectation?
Yeah, I don't see boundaries as limits. I mean, I see boundaries as healthy. And in fact, they don't cause for limitation. Help enhance freedom, I would think. Because once I put that fence down or that stake in the ground, then I know, okay, I'm not going to get that call. I can be fully free, be fully present to show up powerfully. Or I'm going to have this boundary with this family member that we're not going to talk about this or we're not going to go here, whatever. And we can be free to talk about so many other different things. So for me, I think and I think boundaries are liberating and they're necessary. And
So
especially,
boundaries equal freedom.
yes, yeah,
Okay.
which is which is funny, but when you think the more you unpack it, the more it kind of makes sense. Especially the higher you go in leadership, the more imperative boundaries are, right?
Yeah. I think of when, people they get these words like boundaries or limits, it's like they have to say, okay, this is it forever. I'm sure some guys probably with marriage, especially if they're maybe all-star jocks and things like that, and maybe they had a bunch of girls and things like that, and they have to settle down. They have just one. Maybe they're like they feel limited to some degree. This is just talking about guys and sex, but it could be in every aspect of what they're doing. Maybe they have one business or one job or one career they're giving a 9 to 5 to. This idea of they want to do everything, but they feel as if they can't. And so when I think of peak performers, it's someone who's like who just can just do so many different things. And I think of like individuals, and you don't have to like them or anything, but I'm just thinking of them, like Elon Musk. We think of David Goggins, like David Goggins. We think of, I'm trying to think of one more at least, Will Smith. People who just do a lot of things, right? And you might ask, like, how do they do all these things? Like, I think Will Smith was like in 7 movies one year or something like this. Like, how does he do that? And people are literally trying to get off their sofa and stop watching TikTok or YouTube Shorts or whatever. So there's a discrepancy in someone's discipline or their ambition versus what other people are living today.
Hmm.
And so one of the things I wanted to ask is, how can someone look at someone who's this high achiever or is doing so much in their day and try, I want to be careful with the words, I want to say mimic, but just kind of like exemplify what they're doing in their day. If they're doing a lot, if they're spending time with their family, if they're, being in these movies, if they're creating all these wonderful companies. And, most people dream of these things in their life, but yet they don't even take action for maybe step one.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think guys get caught in a cycle, right? Where they want to do something great. They see these inspirational people, and then they try to do some big inspirational thing, and they don't succeed in it because they made the goal that was way too big. And then what happens is they fall right back into the rut that they were like, I told you you couldn't do that, and so, you kind of fall back into that guilt of, or that trap of shame, or lack of self-confidence, or whatever it is, because of the fact that you maybe overcommitted. And so the first thing I would encourage guys to do is understand that comparison is the robber of joy. Number one, don't compare yourself to Elon Musk. Don't compare yourself to Will Smith. They have cultivated disciplines on top of disciplines to get to where they are. But we do that all the time, right? We go on Instagram and see the new diet hack, or the whatever, and it's like, okay, I'm going to do that. They make some goal that's way too big, and they define success as somebody else defines it, and they say, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to jump on that, and it's unrealistic, right? And so what happens is they fail to follow through, and then that reinforms, that failure reinforms that circulating narrative in the head that you can't do that. Just go back on the couch, man. That's just what you do. You play video games all day, whatever. And so the problem is with so many men is that they have lost self-confidence in themselves. And this happens because I get the question all the time, how do you become more confident? Well, you think about it. Michael, if me and you, we're living in the same city, and I said, Michael, I'm going to meet you Thursday night. We're gonna grab a beer at the local pub. And Thursday night, I showed up at like 8:30. You'd be like, "Wait a minute, you said you're gonna show up at 7:30. What's going on here?" And then the next Thursday, I showed up at 9. And then the next Thursday, I didn't show up at all. Eventually, you'd be like, "I don't know if I have confidence in this guy that he's gonna show up anymore." You would lose confidence in the relationship, right? Well, this is what happens with ourselves. So when we make a promise, even if it's to ourselves, and we don't keep it, inside, our mind says, why in the world would anyone trust you? If you can't even trust yourself that you're going to set an alarm for 6 o'clock and get up, you're an untrustworthy person. And so we lose confidence in ourselves, meaning, and it comes full circle, we lose self confidence, right? And so, what's the best way to gain self confidence, to get that motivation, to get that sense of purpose? Is to make a promise, to make small promises and keep them. And what happens is we rebuild our rapport with ourself. It's the equivalent of me saying, "Hey, Michael, so okay, give me another chance. I promise you I'm going to show up at 7:30." And then the next week I show up at 7:30, and the next week I show up at 7:30. Guess what's going to happen? You're going to think, "Okay, I think this guy follows through. I think I can trust him. I'm confident in this relationship." The same thing with ourselves. But we think that it's okay to break these promises to ourselves because no one else knows. But our subconscious mind knows. And so what happens is we lose rapport with ourselves, and we know that we're not living an authentic life. Our insides aren't matching our outsides. And then so instead of making small promises that we can keep and stacking wins, we just go for some big thing that David Goggins did. Whoa, he can run a marathon on broken shins. Maybe I can too. And then we don't do it. I mean, that's an extreme scenario, but we don't do it. And then again, that reinforces that narrative again. And we fall right back into and this is the cycle we fall into. Right. And so it's really important to understand, number one, don't compare yourself to them. Understand that it's important for you to make promises with yourself and then keep them. The second thing I would say is identify what your mission is. And again, I work with men exclusively. So men need a mission, right? It's part of our masculine essence, and everyone, whether you're a man or woman, has a masculine and feminine essence. But what drives the masculine is mission, is accomplishments, is excellence, is having a sense of purpose, building, right? And so if we don't have something that focuses us, we don't have a mission, that we're not building something, we lose a sense of purpose as a man, right? And so then even if we did want to be confident and we did want to get motivation and be disciplined and all that stuff, we got nothing to get motivated to do, right? Because we haven't defined what our mission is. So for me, it's like make promises and keep them to build your self-confidence. Begin with the end in mind. Like I said, find out what makes you tick. Like if I were to ask you that question, what does it look like to live a life that's worthy of imitation? What's going to light you on fire? Okay, we can think about that and build a mission around that and get after that, right? Make promises around that and follow it. So that's kind of, I mean, and again, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going real high level on this, but
Mhm.
those are some little tips I would give.
Yeah. I love those tips. And of course, today is definitely just, I guess you could say, an introductory conversation for anyone who might be at that point where they're like, you know what, maybe I should do something. Maybe I should dare a little bit more today. Maybe I should take the first step. And I know the first step can be maybe the most scary step ever. And there, there's a quote. They say, when you're afraid to take the step or to take a step or any step, that's when you need to make that step the loudest. Because when you take that step, you're like, hey, I'm being pronounced, right? I'm being deliberate. And when you give intention to that and then you mix it with discipline, long term and consistency, then that's when change is going to occur. I know people might think of health, for example. People go to online health and they're like, okay, I'm gonna go to the gym, and they go to the gym and they look in the mirror and they don't see any change, right? It's not going to happen in one day, right? It takes time, right? We think of home, right? You sent your wife a nice text message or something like that, and she's all happy. You maybe got her a gift or some flowers. And then you go back to your old habits of maybe just sitting on the sofa being a slob or, just being absent. Home is going to, not be consistent either. And then your happiness, right? What makes you happy? Maybe pizza makes you happy, right? Maybe spending time with your kids make you happy. Two big spectrums there, but you do it for a period of time and then you stop, right? You fall back into your old habits. So learning about your habits, like, and are your habits helping you go forward? Because I believe like habits like drinking and doing drugs might not be the best for you every single day, right? I'm not saying you can't go out with the boys and have a nice beverage, right? If you plan it or something like that, sure, go for it. But people are just making it their coping mechanism. And very similar to your story, my father was an alcoholic. He was absent, single mom growing up, but I've learned a lot from him, not so much from his lessons, but from his failures. Going into my marriage, I did a lot of work prior, dealing with a lot of women who might not have been good wives or good family mates. I said, let me look for someone who I want to start a family with. And it was the home aspect. And of course, even though you do all the work, check out your values and everything, you have to live with somebody. It's very different when you start living with someone because you have to know the quirks, everything, and the wrong. Like it's a lot to it. And so the first couple of years of marriage are going to be dicey, and you have to learn how to navigate. You have to communicate. You have to work together, and it's challenging, especially like when we are these warriors. Like we give ourselves this warrior aspect that as a man, like my mission is my mission, but yet when we have men's groups, it's not so much of you're by yourself anymore. You're not this lone ranger. You are part of the community. You are part of the Spartan Warrior of 300. So you are separating yourself from being this individualized person and saying, hey, I'm going to find an entity that's not by myself, and it's the support system. And most men today, they will reach for a bottle before they reach for a men's group, I think, or something along those lines. And it's not because they want to, it's just because they have never have been given the alternative. My father has never been to a men's group or support group. I never saw it growing up. I didn't even know about it. right? Even in my church, there was like no men's groups or things like that, right? They had youth counseling and stuff like that, but it was no men's group. And so when I was off into the real world, it was like it was me versus the world. And yet now we have this idea that we don't have to fight the world by ourselves anymore, right? We can develop our team, we could develop our circles. And so this idea of men's group is definitely something that is trending in the world today, where people are starting to lean on other gentlemen and learning from them, from business senses to family endeavors. Like we can learn from people. Like this is the aspect of wisdom, because you might have not had a strong father growing up or had a a good upbringing as a child, but it doesn't mean that you have to commit to what your circumstance was. And I think of this interview, and it's kind of like like a short story, and you probably know it, where it was these two boys and they grew up together, and the father was an alcoholic, and he would go to work and come home and he would berate his wife, and it wasn't a good marriage. And so the boys learned, like, hey, this is my father, right? So time goes on, both boys grow up. One boy follows in his father's footsteps, right? He gets a blue collar job and he's coming home, he's drinking, and he's doing the same things his father did with his wife. And it was a very unhealthy relationship. And so when he was asked during an interview, because both brothers were interviewed, he basically said, because I watched my father. And we fast forward to the other boy. He has a loving household, loving marriage, a thriving business. And the interviewer asked the same question, like, how were you able to accomplish all of this? And he basically said the same thing. I watched my father. It was perspective. And the perspective was, I can see what is happening. And if I am going to keep on going with it, or I see what is happening and I don't like it. And right now, there could be injected some perspective in your life. Do you like where you are today? And if you don't like where you are you going to change it? Some people, they just fall victim of their circumstances. And that's the quickest way for, someone to not be happy, because you just feel as if you can't move. You feel as if there are no freedoms in your life, right? Looking at the boundary aspect, where we have the freedom to change, we have the freedom to grow, we have the freedom to move. So support groups are so powerful. I know, from experience, but it wasn't something that I know is readily available to everyone, first come saying, hey, I want to change my life, let me get a support group. And so the work that you're doing is definitely, helping people like that. But it could be also intimidating. And so my question to you is, this, big intimidating step or leap that men might have to be making in their life today, what's something that they can look at to say, you know what, it's better for me to take the step than for me to ignore it, or for me to wait for something really bad to happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, men don't wait until it's too late. But for the men listening who may be wondering, should I do this or not? Or what's the value in this? Or why should I do this? My question would be similar to what you asked. Take a look around. Are you so here's the thing. If your listeners, if any of your listeners are fathers, okay? If you have a son, we know statistically speaking, your son has a great chance of becoming exactly the man that you are today. Right? It's a high likelihood that he's going to just become who you are today. I've seen it in my life. I see it in my clients' lives every single day. We know that to be true. If you have a daughter, she's going to grow up to crave the attention from a man just like you. So, if you want your son to grow up to be a great husband, you need to model what that looks like, because your kids will not always do what you say, but you better believe they're going to do what you do. If you want your daughter to grow up and bring home a great man one day, then you need to model that greatness so that she knows how to recognize it when she sees it in someone else. And so if you don't have the courage to do it for yourself, have the courage to do it for your family. Because if you take a look around and if you don't want your kids to have the marriage that you have, then the best chance you have of giving them something different is to change it and model it for yourself. And to say you're not alone. If you feel lonely, or if you feel like you're struggling, some statistics will kind of blow your mind that I'll share here. But we know that right now there's at least 7 million men in the United States that aren't in the workforce, And many of them they're isolated and they're medicating with distractions and medications, right? Numbing themselves on screens. We know that the average man spends over 2,000 hours per year on a screen, right? Escaping reality. Since 1995, the number of men with zero close friends has jumped from 3% to 15%, which, if you think about how many numbers that, I mean, it's unbelievable. The truth is that men are silent, they're lonely, and they're disconnected. And it's literally killing us. We know that the suicide rates are way higher in men than women. And the reality is we need one another, right? Some more statistics that maybe perhaps you've heard before, maybe not. We know that 1 in 4 children in the United States will be raised in a home without a father. 63% of youth suicides come from fatherless homes. 90% of homeless runaway children come from fatherless homes. 85% of kids with behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. And the last one, which is crazy to me, 71% of high school dropouts come from fatherless homes. And so, how you show up in your home matters. What you bring to your family matters. To be the best version of you for your family matters, right? And so, let's just be real with one another and understand the lone wolf dies alone. The strong wolf builds a pack, and he surrounds himself with like minded men who are on the same mission. And that's exactly why I started the Dad Nation Coalition. It's simply a group of men who are, like I said, like minded, going after the same thing, who want to be great fathers, great husbands, better leaders, to reclaim their home, their health, and their happiness. And so those are some reasons why I would say to you, man, take the step. And it doesn't have to be my community, it could be any community, but get around other men because that's what transformed my life. Remember, I surrounded myself, I don't know if I told you this story, but within 18 months,
Hmm. Yeah.
but I surrounded myself with 5 men who held me to the standard that I said I wanted for my life. And that's why I've created the Iron Five, which all my clients, that's part of our process, is I help them find those 5 guys to get them around them, to hold them to the standard that they said they wanted for themselves and their families. And so, yeah, I'm a huge advocate for community, man.
The strong wolf creates a pack.
Hmm.
There is strength in numbers, and you don't have to create 100 guys or anything like that. Like, I don't want you to think like you need so many people. You said the Iron Five. I think that's one of the best numbers to go. It's not too daunting, and you can do the work to find 5 people in your life. And so, if you don't have the 5 people, do the work to find those people. Right, they're out there. And of course, for support, there's, as you said, there are many men's group out there, but today is an opportunity for you, Mitchell, for guys to learn about your groups and how you help other men, form their own groups. And so I definitely want this to be promoted as much as possible so people can at least get an understanding of, what is required of them and what they should be requiring of others. As we begin to wrap up, Mitchell, I would love to get some final words from you. I know you gave us a, great closing statement in the last bit, but one of the things I was thinking about this whole entire interview almost is I was thinking about the book or the movie, The Peaceful Warrior, and you might be familiar with it, but there was a scene at the end of the movie or in the book, and it was illustrated where there was a guy who wanted to know the secret sauce for what the guy had learned in the movie, right? Or in the book. And basically, it was to give him this edge. But then the guy just basically replied, is Dan Millman. He said that there is no secret sauce, right? There is no magic or, or shortcut, right? There was a lot of hard work. It was a lot of mindset. It was a lot of getting rid of the things that didn't work. And even though he said that to the guy, he was like, no, there's got to be some secret sauce there still, because he was looking for a shortcut. He like he didn't want to get down and do the work. And sometimes we have to get down and do the work. So if you could, can you give us some final words, and then of course please tell everyone how they could find you, reach out to you, and then possibly join the men's group that you have?
Yeah, I would say stop looking for the magic bullet. Stop looking for the silver bullet. You know, stop waiting for the perfect time because that does not exist. It doesn't exist. There is no such thing as easy. Okay. And if you're listening to this and you're waiting for that, I want you to hear me say this. It's important that you choose your hard, right? Because here's the deal. Being in great shape is hard. Being overweight is hard. Having an amazing marriage is hard. Having a bad marriage is hard. Having a lot of money is hard. Being broke is hard. You know, having a successful entrepreneur and starting your own business is hard. Working for someone else is hard. You know, literally there is no such thing as perfect. There is no such thing as easy, because no matter what path you choose, it will be difficult. And so at the end of the day, you must choose your hard. Choose the difficult path, because at the end of the day, we were built for it. Men were built to take the weight. One of my clients said to me, "Well, I don't want to deal with my kids. Why do I have to be the one to deal with them?" It's because you were designed for it, right? You're physically stronger, you're larger, you have the capacity to compartmentalize mentally, emotionally. It is your responsibility. And it's important for you to understand that, step into that, and stop waiting for the cavalry, because it's not coming, right? My kid is not going to pull the Snickers bar out of my hand. There's not going to be any pack of cheerleaders at the gym 6 o'clock in the morning cheering me on when I go to the gym. You know what I mean? My wife is not going to grab the cell phone out of my hands. I have to set boundaries with myself and understand the only way to get different results is to start living differently. If we keep doing the exact same thing and accepting different result or expecting different results, that's the adage, the definition of insanity, right? And so if we want different results, if we want a different life, we have to learn how to think differently and decide differently. And hey, just before I forget, Michael, I want to give your listeners, a free gift today. So if they're listening to the show, and if you're in a long-term relationship, or any relationship really for that matter, or you're married or whatever the case is, I have something called the connection code. Okay. And this is just 50 questions to spark the fun and bring the fire back. Now, we didn't get into this, but in relationships, so often men try to connect with their wives in all the wrong ways, or they don't know how to connect with them on an emotional level. And at the end of the day, our wives need to be connected with emotionally, especially before we can connect with them physically. And so these are 50 of my favorite questions, and they're designed to cover like fun, intimacy, dreaming, life, all that stuff. So you can either go to dadnationcode.com/code, or Michael, I'll just give you the link in the show notes below, and just hit the link and download the guide. It's totally free. And then when you put your kids down tonight, or you go out on a date night, just grab 2 or 3 from this list. And it's designed to really unravel and really engage your wife on a deeper level. And so it takes all the guesswork out of the conversations. So that's a little gift that I'd love for you guys to take advantage of. You asked, how could they find me? Well, I do 3 things. I keep it real simple, man. I do, content. You can work with me through content, through coaching, or through courses. That's it. So my content is the Dad Nation podcast. Yeah, go check it out on YouTube. Whatever. You could just Google it, you'll find it. But I'll also give you the link in the show notes below. I have a program, courses. It's called the High Performance Husband, which is essentially my entire brain in an online program that you can do. It's a self-guided journey to reclaiming your home health and happiness. And of course, if you're the kind of guy who's real tactical and wants to work one-to-one or in a group context, I do coaching as well. And that's, like I said, I do group. So the Dad Nation Coalition, which again is that brotherhood of like-minded men. And for the right person, I do one-to-one as well. But you know what? If you're hearing me talk and there's a fire in your gut as you're listening to this, and I would say listen to your instincts, and I'll give you the link to reach out through a strategy call, and I'll be happy to jump on, totally complimentary, happy to jump on a call and just hear more of your story and to see what might be a good fit for you. It could be any one of those things, but I'd be happy to connect. And on the intake form, if you, when you fill it out, just let me know that you heard of me through this podcast, and I'll be sure that I jump on the call and talk with you one-to-one instead of somebody from my team or whatever the case is. So that's how you can reach me.
Perfect. And I appreciate that. I know when you have a coaching business, especially, there's more than just you as a coach. And it's important that, like when I bring on guests, that there's some level of availability to reach them, because we spend close to an hour with people trying to understand your mindset to some degree. And I'm sure you're building your business and your brand on that same mindset, but there's a connection and a bit of vulnerability that happens with having conversations and podcasts where they feel as if they created a connection with someone. They're like, you know what, maybe I can tell him or her, like if it was a woman coach, it's this idea of, let me try at least with them. So if you felt any connection with Mitchell today, if you felt like he inspired you, take some level of action today, take the first step. He has all of the links right down below. Maybe just become a listener of the podcast for a little bit, learn more, begin to process your personal development or your high performance mindset or journey is not just one day or one episode. It takes some time. As you said, Mitchell, there is no perfect time, but we can take action today. So let it be some degree of action that can change your life. So maybe when you do your eulogy and you do the before and after, you're like, I'm thinking about the after bit a little bit more. So, we have this lifetime, but it happens so quick. So take action. Don't just squander it away. Be deliberate. I do want to thank you, Mitchell, for, spending some time, of course, and talking about your work today.
Thank you for having me on the show, Michael. I appreciate your time, and I hope that I've added value to you and your listeners today. And looking forward to staying in touch, man.